Cool.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaclyn Perrone, and I'm the design director of thoughtbot's Boston studio. So thoughtbot is a product consultancy of about 100 people across 6 offices. So we're a group of designers and developers who create mobile and web-based products. So we release those products to market and we grow businesses. So we've worked with all sorts of clients, from 2-person startups to Fortune 500 enterprises to universities, governments, nonprofits. And being that we have a user-centric approach to product, user research is at the crux of our engagements. So today I'm going to talk about user interviews. So user research is so important because it sets us up to build better and more intuitive products. I've been in this industry for over 10 years and have been doing user research for the last 7 for all different types of products and clients as a design consultant. It's my favorite part of being a designer, for it gives purpose to my work. By talking to users, I'm able to understand and address their very real needs, motivations, and pain points, and then translate them into a usable and relevant solution that would make their life better. So for the first half of our time together, I'm going to share some tips for how you, the facilitator, can make the most out of your user interviews. And then I'm going to call on a volunteer from the audience to be interviewed by me to show some of those tips in action. And that said, it's not all roses. Sometimes things go wrong during user interviews. So in the second half of our time together, we'll discuss some common pitfalls and how to address them. So just to kind of level set here, when I say user interviews, I'm talking about asking background questions to suss out a user's current behaviors and the motivations behind them. So this is to help us decide if the problem that we're trying to solve is A, actually a problem for this person, and B, if it is, are we understanding or framing it correctly? So let's see a show of hands. Who here has facilitated a user interview before?
Oh, wow, that's a lot. We have about
Cool.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Great. And so who here has not facilitated but has observed a user interview before? Not as, oh, I see, 17. Okay. And who here has never participated at all in a user interview? And this is all new to them. Cool. I actually don't see any hands. Do you have a sense, Carrie?
Yeah, there's 2 people raising their hands right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and you can see it in the participants thing at the bottom.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Oh, I see. Cool. All right, so that's great. Okay, it's done. Everyone's go home now. I'm just kidding. All right, good to know. So let's talk about, so regardless of your level of experience, the following are some guidelines to help set you up for a successful interview. So the first thing is the amount of people in the interview itself. So no more than 2 people with a user. So generally 1 person will facilitate while the other observes and takes notes. So the facilitator is the only person who should be talking to the user. So this is to prevent being led down different tangents from another person kind of jumping in, and to quickly establish trust and focus with the user. So if the note taker wants to ask something, they should write it down and pass it to the facilitator. It's also helpful to, before it starts, to set those ground rules so everyone understands before going in. So any more than 2 people can be overwhelming for the user and cause them to clam up rather than open up, which is not what you want to happen. So at thoughtbot, if we have more people who want to be involved, we do the interview in a room with 2 people, but with a Google Hangout setup, so that any other people can observe quietly, remotely, no camera, no microphone. It just makes it again, keeps that level of comfort with the user while having more people observe. And if the people who are observing want to ask a question, we have it set up so that, you know, we can tell them to send the note taker maybe a message on Slack if it's not too distracting. And the note taker will pass that message along to the facilitator, maybe via a Post-it note or what have you. And then we also make sure everyone knows that we might not get to their question. So that's also good to kind of set those expectations too for like external observers. So another thing too is really important is to have an intro prepared. So your intro, so rather than jumping right in, you want to take a breath, make eye contact, be like a human person, smile, thank them for being there. And in this intro prepared, you should just just say who you are and why you're interviewing them, what the goals are of the interview, what you hope to learn from them. Let them know that they'll be kept anonymous, if they will be. Usually they are. Ask permission to record. We always record the audio, not the video, or maybe we use, you know, we can record their expressions too and like the screen at the same time. But for the most part, we get the audio and we share that with the rest of the team. And we use like voice memos on iPhones, so it's not so high tech. So we tell the users too that there are no wrong answers. That's really important in your intro. You know, we're not testing them. We're testing our designs. We're just kind of, there are no wrong answers. Again, we want to just learn from them. And also it's really helpful to give them a brief rundown of what to expect. This is likely their first time maybe doing this. I also like to ask that as well in the intro. So you talk about your time together as though you're moving through a narrative. Like first, I'll be asking some questions about your background and then switch over to questions about your typical day and workflow, things like that. So you want to just keep them grounded. Another important thing is having a conversation. So have a script or a list of topics you'd like to cover, but allow yourself to go off script and let the conversation evolve organically, as if you're having a conversation with a friend or relative. So ask about behaviors, not feelings. So learning that someone likes or dislikes something just because is not very helpful in your research. Their feelings will naturally come from the stories that they tell about their expectations, about what actually happened and what they did in response to it. So ask open-ended questions to avoid yes or no answers. So start with questions with who, what, where, when, why, how. Don't ask, would you use this? Say, when would you use this? Why would you use this? At what point of your day would this be helpful for you? Things of that nature. You know, like how do you find mentors to connect with outside of your network? Describe your ideal mentor-mentee relationship. You know, don't just ask questions that will only give you yes or no. And asking follow-up questions is really important. So based on the last thing they said, just kind of keep digging, ask why. Even if you stray from your script a little bit, it just keeps it conversational and gives you a chance to dive deeper. Don't lead the witness. So silence is golden. So give them time to think about the question and figure out their own answer. One very common pitfall is filling up the silence with examples right after you ask your question. So like, how do you share research with your teammates? Do you meet in person? Do you send emails? Like, just ask the question, stop talking. Giving examples prevents them from interpreting your question in their own way. And oftentimes their interpretation is a finding all on its own. And don't spoon feed future ideas. So forcing someone to agree that something would be helpful or great is not at all helpful for your research. So one of my favorites, playing dumb, checking your ego at the door. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. I ask so many stupid questions. Things of just kind of like asking them how they check their email or like things like that you would assume like probably their phone. But just like ask anyway, get as much information as you can. Oftentimes your assumption is incorrect and then you'll get an answer that you didn't even expect. So some of my stupidest questions are usually around their tech habits. So like I ask them what they use their phone for, what tasks they do on their laptop instead of their phone. I could assume like the kinds of things they do, but I really don't know this person. So it's good to ask. And paraphrasing their answers back to them to clarify any confusion you might have is a really good thing too. If they're saying something and you're kind of in the weeds a little bit and you don't just move on, just take a minute and really understand what they're trying to say. Being an active listener is very important. So again, human time, actively acknowledge, listen, and react to what they are saying. Being a captive audience encourages them to elaborate. And you being in the moment kind of gets them out of their head and also in the moment too. So giving them nonverbal cues to show that you understand, like a little head nod goes a long way. Don't type your notes as they talk. So if you are solo, record the audio just so you can really, and have a notepad for sure if you want to jot down some things that you want to, but for the most part, like try not to type or have a computer in front of you. That is just like such a buzzkill. And if you have a person next to you to type notes, that's totally fine. We use our laptops. We just say at the top that like, I'm taking notes using my laptop, whatever. So again, it's just best to kind of give them all the context they need. So staying focused on the person in front of you is the key thing there. And let's see. Yes. And finally, after the interview, this is really important. Just give yourself at least 30 minutes to decompress, especially if you're going to another interview soon after. So I've like over the course of my career, I've gone from just 15 minutes in between interviews to back-to-back interviews to now I try and I give enough time, 30 to 45 minutes in between if I can. I don't really do more than 5 if they're long, like 45-minute an hour interviews. I'd probably do around 4 if I want to really like maximize my time. So synthesizing your notes afterwards, start capturing broad common themes. This is super important. So your interview will die on the vine if you don't take the time to think about what you just heard and allow yourself the time to start making connections. If you're doing solo research, so this means just allowing more time for this. So listening to your recording, it just takes longer. Listening to your recordings, like jotting down the things that are surprising to you. Having a partner, the synthesis part can go pretty quickly. Usually after an interview, I'll rattle off with my partner about just key takeaways, just things that we didn't know already, things that were surprising to us. And use your findings to prepare for your next interview. So tweak questions, maybe tweak your prototype if you're showing a prototype, and shift your focus if you need to. It's like a living, breathing thing, you know, you don't have to like be totally pigeonholed to a particular, thing. Cool. All right, those are the tips. So right now, I'm going to ask for a volunteer from the audience to be the subject of a user interview. It'll be about 10 minutes or so. We'll chat about your own professional growth and your relationship to user interviews, the company that is our host for today. So yeah, would anyone like to participate?
Just raise your hand.
Yeah, raise your digital hand. Whoops, that's not good. All right, I still can't really. Do you see anyone?
I do not. Give me one moment.
Cool.
Oh, there we go. We found one.
Great.
Hey, Al.
How's it going?
Hi, hello. How are you?
Good.
Awesome. We'll get into particulars about who you are and where you are, but let's just start pretending that I obviously don't know those things. So we'll just kind of get right into the intro. So hello, Al. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. My name is Jaclyn, and I'm a product designer working with user interviews on a potential new product offering. So our goal is to help working professionals like yourself find resources that will help them level up their user research skills. So in order to do that, I'd like to get to know you and ask some questions about your own professional experience, as well as some background questions to help us understand your habits and preferences. So this
Sounds
is not
good.
a test. I'm sorry?
Sounds good. Shoot.
Cool. So this is not a test. There are no wrong answers. We like to keep these conversations casual, and we encourage you to talk openly. So we're here to learn from you, to inform our efforts, and to ultimately create a better experience for you and others like you. So first, one thing, have you ever been in an interview before like this?
No.
Awesome, cool. Well, again, we encourage you to just talk openly. Anything you say will be helpful for us. So again, thank you in advance. Also too, I'm not really doing this, but I'm going to be recording the audio of this session. So to share with our team members who cannot be here today, you'll be kept anonymous. Is that okay with you?
Of course, that's fine.
Awesome. So before we begin, do you have any questions for me?
No.
Okay, cool. Let's get into it. So Al, tell me about yourself. So where are you? Who are you, and what do you do?
So my name is Al. I am an associate creative director. I am located in Orange, California. Logged into this because I've seen market research, but have never participated actively. So I thought this would be useful information to have moving forward.
Awesome. And how did you learn about today's webinar?
I think I was just prompted by an email and thought it was interesting, so I just clicked on it and signed up.
Okay. Awesome. Do you remember where that email came from?
I wish I could tell you. I get so many emails now. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Do you remember where you were when you got the email? Like what your situation was, whether you were at work or, well, I just did my thing I told everyone not to do.
No. Like I said, I got tons of emails. It could have been on a computer. It could have been on my phone.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. And so you're the associate creative director at the company. So how long have you been in that role?
Long time. 12 years.
Awesome. Cool. And how do you fit within your team?
We could say top of the food chain. I work with 2 direct reports and a bunch of different freelancers.
Okay. Cool. And let's see. And what is your relationship to user interviews, the company? Well,
because I worked as part of a larger company, it's always been siloed. So usually the user interviews will happen. Like I said, I think I've been to I've seen one, but wasn't involved. Typically that information is spoon-fed to us, which is another reason I signed up for this. It's like, yeah, I kind of want to know more about this so that I can be more informed and help make decisions.
Cool. Are you hoping to be more involved in the actual process itself as well?
Yeah, because like I said, I'm an associate creative director, but it's been mostly print, video, a little bit of web, and I've been actively involved with the UX team over the last 18 months. So I kind of wanted to be more informed in that regard. And obviously interviews is a huge part of UX. So I'm just trying to round out the information that I have to like I said, be able to lead teams.
Cool. And as you know, the company User Interviews, which is hosting this podcast, how familiar are you with them?
Hardly at all. I think I signed up for an email somewhere along, and all of a sudden I started getting emails from them, but I don't know a lot about them.
Okay. Good to know. All right, more on that later. Let's chat about, so how do you manage your own leveling up or career development?
By never stopping my education in terms of classes, online classes, webinars, anything and everything that I can get my hands on.
Okay. And how do you find these things?
Again, and it could be anywhere. It could be a colleague. It could be emails that I get. It could be trade magazines. It could be anywhere, really.
Cool. So you clearly have a lot of content being flung at you in all directions. How do you, yeah. What are some criteria that you have that help you choose which ones you want to partake in and which ones you don't?
I think like right now, I use a lot of content filters, things like Flipboard that feed my phone with articles, and I can curate them, obviously. So lately I've been really focusing on UX design, human and computer interaction, pretty much all the titles that fall under that category. That's kind of seems to be my focus lately.
Cool. Can I, why is that? Why is that your focus lately?
Like I said, because I've seen what bad is, and I'm trying to figure out what good is.
Nice. Let us know when you find out.
It's interesting, and that's kind of another reason, aside from this, if I could have a one-on-one with you, it would be amazing because of where you are, where you work. Because I've lately run into people at enterprise level companies, and they're working with huge teams, and I'm trying to figure out what people are looking for within the role of UX. So for example, every time I see a UX position online or listed anywhere, people seem to be looking for unicorns that know everything from user research, data analysis, user design, and user interface design, which is, the whole bag. And I don't think, based on what I've seen and the people that I've met, that any one person could do all of that well.
Gotcha.
So the question I guess I have is it better to know how to conduct a user interview, or is it better to have someone that's really good at it doing it for you?
Cool. That's a really good question. I'm going to table that and answer that towards the end. That's a really good question. Because a lot of it depends on the needs of your team. It's a whole thing. It's a whole ecosystem. But
yeah,
I do want to know, in the process of you leveling up your career development, what are some frustrations you have in that regard?
Getting a definitive answer to the question I just asked you.
I love it. Cool. What are some other frustrations in general when you're trying to level up your own development?
I guess trying to find mentors or people that are willing to talk about their expertise. That seems to kind of be a problem. There seems to be all kinds of online information, but when you post a question, there doesn't seem to be a lot of answers. Gotcha.
Can you tell me a story about the last time you tried to find a mentor or post a question?
I think I went online and there are in Orange County, California, lots of UX meetups, and I've gone to several. And sadly, I've been the person to speak the most after people do presentations. I've been waiting for the moderators and the people that are senior UX people. I've been waiting to hear their critiques, and I'm usually the one who ends up speaking more than anyone else.
Oh, interesting.
Which kind of makes it hard to find a mentor.
Okay. If that's not working for you, what's your next step? How else would you find one?
I'm still poking around, going to attending webinars like this, and still looking.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. So we have a few more minutes to ask you. So I wanted to ask you about your role within user research, which we already talked about. You're more of people kind of giving you the results of things, and then now you're curious and wondering how it even happens. So that's why you're here today. Let me think.
Yeah.
Have you ever,
in
your
terms, by the way,
past,
in terms of the marketing research, which I guess, I don't know, I guess marketing research is user interviews. What I said, I've seen what bad looks like, where I've seen an interviewer lead the people they were interviewing, which was insane to watch.
yeah.
So again, I know what bad looks like. Waiting to see what bad looks like.
Yes. Have you in your past at all ever been part of a user interview?
No.
Even outside of this job? Okay, cool. Let's see. I have another. So just a couple more questions, and then we can wrap this up. So for today's webinar, who else did you tell about this webinar?
I actually have been really busy lately, so I was lucky I'm even attending.
Okay, good.
So
Cool.
yeah, I think I just got a reminder this morning. I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's today. Okay.
Awesome. And where was that reminder?
Email.
Okay. So I'm just gonna wrap this up with one more question. So if user interviews, the company, again, that's hosting today, if they could create a product for you specifically, what would that product be?
Basically providing what you're describing today on a small scale level. Right now, I seem to be working with startups, and budget always seems to kind of be a major concern. And when I mention things like user interviews, I'm like, wait, is this going to be costing us a lot of money? If you're engaging a company or a third party, sometimes it can be expensive from what I've seen. You know, things like User Zoom, which is a fantastic product. I've seen the other end of it. I haven't seen the process or how it was initiated. But yeah, something like that, something that I can provide to companies that are reaching out to me that are mostly startups in smaller scale situations.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, what about the current offering does not solve that for you?
Like I said, I don't know enough about user to say.
Okay, cool. All right. So thank you so much for your time and for your answers and for your thoughtful answers. Really appreciate it. And thanks for raising your hand.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure.
And I'm happy to connect afterwards too, if you want to chat more.
Yeah, I would love to, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. This is one way to find someone to talk to. Cool. Thanks, Al.
All right, you're welcome.
Cool. All right. So there, I thought it was kind of funny because again, like I call this out during, but yeah, like it's so easy to fall into like these pitfalls, right? Like I asked a question and the question I asked them about, I don't even remember. I was like, I pretty much blacked out, guys. I have no idea what just happened. But there was a question where I followed up with an example, and it's so easy to do this stuff. So, you're aware of it. The more you do these, the easier, the better it is. I'm sure I asked some questions that had yes or no answers. You know what I mean? Like, it is just a matter of getting the feel for it and being aware. Hopefully that was helpful for y'all. We're gonna get to questions too at the end as well. Okay, so that happened. And we're gonna go now into, what if things don't go as planned? So no matter how much you plan for a user interview, you still need to keep on your toes and quell some hiccups along the way. So let's talk about some of the common things that can go wrong and the ways in which we can prevent and address them. All right. So one thing here is your prototype doesn't work. Oh boy. Like one time I was in a convenience store showing a prototype to get feedback from store owners, and there was no Wi-Fi, and we didn't even really think about that. So in the moment, we just had to show our static mock-ups in Sketch instead, and just kind of change our questioning a bit because you couldn't really click through anything at the time. So I have a question for the audience, poll time. Who here has experienced this? Ooh, I see the hands. Cool. Oh, oh my goodness. I feel for you all. Like nothing more sweat inducing, you know? So some things you can do. So during the session, turning to paper. So if you don't have, so having printouts, that's like very prepared. But if you don't have printouts with you, and if your thing is just it's so botched and it's like kind of irrecoverable, turning to pen and paper is always fine. Maybe you can either sketch out some of the parts that you know really well and put it in front of people. Even asking the user to draw things is actually some of the most insightful tests I've ever had. You know, like for example, if let's say you're redoing an internal tool and it's like a hot mess, it's like been redesigned and redeveloped over like 10 years, there's like 1,000 different navigations. You can put a piece of paper in front of the user and have them just from memory draw the tool they use every day. And you'll be surprised what features just kind of bubble up naturally, the things that they use the most. So doing those kinds of things are really, really helpful. Even ask them to draw like an ideal interface, giving them a prompt and having them do it is, this is like a good test to do, not even just like on the fly, like having them do it in that way. When all else fails, you can always turn to their phone and have them show you apps that they use that they're most helpful for them. Maybe they're apps that are kind of relatable to what your product is that you're trying to learn about. And one way to prevent this from happening, so for next time, for one thing I learned from that convenience store story is hosting all your files locally, so you don't need Wi-Fi. So this is like a site, HTML, basic HTML site. This includes all the scripts, the images, the libraries, everything. Again, bringing printouts is a good backup plan. Having the user tap on elements and ask them what they would expect to happen next. It's totally usable. Also, bring the device that you've been testing on in the office. So testing on a new device can throw all sorts of unexpected wrenches. And test it yourself before you give it to someone else. I've been in such a rush sometimes, and I don't even get to go through the whole flow, and you just kind of like scattered and you put it in front of someone and you're like, oh my God, like none of those touch points like work. So yeah, just go through everything. Pretend that you're doing the test yourself. Just make sure it's not broken. So another thing that can go wrong, let's say your user is stuck on fake data. So I was showing an app to a customer service rep, and it showed fake products, fake subscriptions, fake timelines, and they just kept talking about how the subscriber scenario we laid out just would not exist, and they couldn't get around that. So who here has experienced this happening before, where their user is just kind of stuck? I see the hands. Whoa, I again feel for you. This is like a group therapy session. Wow, yep, okay. So let's say during the session, I sometimes, if it's like so bad, I have to take a minute and step outside and like of myself here and be like, okay, this is a prototype. The data is not real. The data is not relevant for today's test. So making sure to mention this in an intro at the beginning too can alleviate questions or concerns, even though they'll probably forget when you get started. So just reiterating that. Keep directing their focus to the task at hand. If they really can't see past the fake data, then ask them why. So maybe it's not about whether or not 2 + 5 = 10, but that they are expecting something else entirely, which was the case too for this the story I mentioned, you know. And it kind of led into like, oh, that's really good to know that that data wouldn't even be here actually. So before the session, If you could just be diligent about the fake data you put in. If you're showing a shopping cart, make sure the prices add up. I do the thing, like the thing is that we're usually doing this pretty quickly. So I've been guilty too of just duplicating like all the information, and then it's just not very helpful. So if you're trying to show like a history of orders, make sure the dates are not all the same. You know, if you don't want to use any values, and just use scribbles and let the user, and tell the user that it's data. Don't use lorem ipsum. Like, use real names, real-ish descriptions. Like, making your data coherent can save you a lot of time during the test and prevent any confusion. Just like get rid of the confusion off the bat. Any weird trip ups, you don't have time for that, you know? It also can bring things up that you didn't really realize were issues, like character length, you know? So take everything as an opportunity to learn. Use real-ish descriptions. And don't use pictures or names of people they may know or hear of, like celebrities, like yourself, their team members, your team members. You know, they have the potential just to create unwelcome distractions and assumptions about your product. Just keep it in a vacuum. So the facilitator is leading the witness. Al mentioned it too. He met the bad things that happen when people are spoon feeding ideas. I had a client who insisted on facilitating the interviews. She had never done it before, ever. I was like, more power. Yeah, do it. Let's do a quick session beforehand, knowing though that she probably would fall into a lot of those pitfalls we talked about before. Such is life. But I prepped her, walked through the script, and they just kept asking leading questions. So who here has experienced this, just watching a nightmare unfold before your eyes of spoon feeding features? Like, wouldn't it be great if, and you're like, no, it wouldn't be. Okay, cool. All right, it's real. During the session, if there's anything you can do, the easiest thing is just jump in with why. Just why. If they're like, wouldn't it be great if this shopping cart, I don't know, emptied itself, and whatever, I can't think of anything. And then they're like, yeah, that'd be great. And then you can just be like, why? And then maybe that'll help them kind of elaborate, open the conversation up a little bit. One thing I do, because this is all learning, we don't know what we're doing half the time. We're just kind of faking it till we make it. I take the opportunity to write down some examples as they're talking and leading the witness, just examples of some questions. So afterwards, when you debrief, give some examples of, hey, are you open to some feedback about the last session? You know, I noticed that you blah, blah, blah. Give them some examples. It's really helpful. It's also too good to set the stage before you go into the interviews of just kind of like, you can even say, I'm looking for feedback on the interview, and then just kind of assume you can do the same for them. So to prevent this from happening, so just spend some time with your script and turn any leading questions into open-ended ones. So when was the last time you did this? Tell me a story about the last time you did that. What do you think will happen when you blank? How often do you do such a thing? So conduct some practice interviews with your teammates. This is so helpful. Mock interviews, any kind of role playing in these scenarios it's just like an amazing way to learn. So it's like the two of you can take turns asking each other questions while a moderator, perhaps a third person, points out examples of open-ended or leading questions. So that's just part of a training. You know, sometimes you don't have time to do any of this stuff, but it'd be good to set aside time to do that. Again, it just takes time to get into the habit of asking for stories rather than opinions. So the more interviews you do, the better you will get, I promise. Do a quick time check. I think we have about 3 minutes before I'll probably pop into some questions. So I have a couple more. Let's say you ran out of questions. Oh God, the interview, it ended like half an hour early. Like one time I was talking to someone who gave 1-sentence answers to everything quickly too, not even without any thinking. It was quite amazing. I was very impressed. So we went through the questions very quickly, but had like 45 minutes set aside to learn from this person and blew through all my questions in like 15 minutes. So I had to really think on my feet and ask a lot of follow-up questions based on the last thing that they said. We also had a prototype to show, so we moved on to that quickly. But who has experienced this before? Just a show of hands, you're kind of going through your interview and you're like, oh, I am done. Oh, this is so cool. Okay, it's interesting. Cool. So during the session, if you're really you just don't know, again, turning to someone's phone is so helpful. Again, like asking them to show you their favorite apps, the ones they use on the way to the session, even asking them how they found the building is kind of interesting. Find the apps that they can't live without, the apps that they just really are on the way to delete. You can have them perform tasks within these apps, see if they have one that's similar, again, to the one that you're testing, and learn what works and what doesn't for them. And if you don't have a smartphone, ask them to tell you some stories. Think about the tasks that they will perform in your app. Maybe your app is about helping you manage your budget. So then asking them questions around how they do that today, what they did yesterday for their budget, probably, maybe nothing, maybe something, who knows. But if you're truly done with the test, then end early. That would make everyone probably very happy. And one way to prevent this, loosen up your script a little bit. Write down topics instead of maybe like a ton of questions. Having the topics allow you to kind of go wherever the conversation leads, and incorporating a bonus section of nice to have questions is super, super helpful. So these things that could go unanswered, would be really interesting to ask. So for example, like the magic wand question, if you had a magic wand, what could you do? And you can do anything to this app, what would you do? As an example. Cool. So I think we're all good. How about we go to some questions for the last 15 minutes or so? How might we go about doing that?
Perfect. So I think the best way to go is I'm just going to go in order of when they were asked.
Okay.
And if anybody has any additional questions, you can pop them in the chat or in the Q&A box, whichever one is easier for you to find. The first question we have is from Emily, who asked kind of early on. She says, a huge challenge I have is that sometimes I'm doing interviews about topics or product areas that I'm not 100% knowledgeable about. And I have a hard time coming up with thoughtful responses or follow-up questions in these situations. I'm so afraid of looking ignorant or dumb. I would love some ideas on how to handle this better.
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, definitely don't try to work on the feeling ignorant and dumb thing. Like that's kind of part of the like checking your ego at the door. Like you were there, just put your curious hat on. You're likely a very curious person if you're in this position asking someone questions about their habits and things of that nature. So, that's kind of part of the designer's job too, especially if you're in a situation where you're working with tons of different clients, like learning different industries, kind of learning, at the end of the day, a lot of people's habits, preferences, like it's kind of like a wash. Like if you can focus on maybe tasks at hand, can be kind of interesting if you want to boil it down to the humanness of it and less of the complete details of their job. Like I've interviewed tons of people who were like, let's say, I think actually even scientists that their intros, I had no idea what they were talking about, honestly. But for the most part, think about what you want to learn from your interview. What are you trying to, maybe focusing on what your goals are for the interview. In that sense, my goals were just learning about pretty much what they did on a daily basis. So just kind of, if that helps, kind of focusing more on their behaviors. Hope that helps. I could probably keep talking for another 20 minutes about this. But yeah, I hope that helps.
And then the second question we had was Al's question during the interview about when it's better to have somebody do interviews for you who's really experienced versus when is it better to know how to do it yourself?
So that just depends on what your role is. So if you are someone who, and plus what you want to get out of the research, like, for example, we have clients who come who have done research beforehand. So they bring us their research, but we have our own way of asking questions. We don't know how that research was conducted. We don't know, if like we talked about before, if there were just kind of a ton of leading questions. So we usually, when we do projects, we kind of we take it seriously, but also still add on some of our own generative research as well. So again, it kind of depends on your role and like what you want out of that information. If you feel like you want to learn about the process, then you should definitely give it a go, but just be thoughtful about that and like the whys around that, and is that sustainable for you in like your current role.
Perfect. And then we had one from Daniela in the Q&A box. And she asked, how do you rescue an interview when the participant is not cooperating with you or when you feel like there's no chemistry between the two of you?
Yes. Okay. So that's something too. Checking your body language, checking them, like what's going on with them. Are they feeling super uncomfortable? Where are you sitting? Are you sitting across from them? I like sitting next to participants. Just feels less of an interrogation. I've had a user interview where he was getting really he actually was getting offended because I was playing dumb so much, but I was just a habit. And I was asking him questions and he's like, I'm not a child. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm really sorry. I hope I didn't, that's not my intention. I'm just learning from you. So just kind of, again, resetting the stage, what's going on, why you're there. If someone's getting really like kind of antsy, you know what, it's a drop in the bucket. Like if they want to go, then that's okay for you. If it's like really gets kind of unbearable and if they're not cooperative, you can choose to end early. I've done it before. It's okay. But I think a lot of it comes down to their comfort level and making sure you get the intro set up so that they know why they're there, and again, like what to expect. I think that helps kind of ease the tension a little bit.
Perfect. And then we have one from Felicia that says, can you talk about things you do before a study to clarify that you have the correct objectives?
Okay. So usually the user research is a means to an end, right? So before we do this research, we kind of get together, and again, I'm working in a client setting. So they'll come in and there are times we'll do a design sprint before the research where if you guys aren't familiar with the process, just totally check out Product Design Sprint. Thoughtbot, we have a ton of resources on it, and we base it off the Google Ventures approach. So it's like a multi-day process. So we understand the context. We understand the research that they have, if they have any. We understand what their business goals are. We try to uncover who their users are, like not just people, which people do come in and say it's for everyone, and we're like red flag. So we try to really narrow down, and we want to also, if we're showing a prototype, we get together as a team and we just kind of bullet point out what our objectives are with this prototype. What are we trying to learn? I've also been getting into the habit of like early stage showing things. I call them learning tools and not prototypes, because prototype in and of itself is such a loaded word. So you just want to learn, just asking, what do I want to learn from this person? That's very helpful, level setting it beforehand. And then afterwards, the synthesis, we also kind of write out assumptions that we have. That's actually a really key part of what we put into our learning tool. We want to test assumptions that we have about the user, about the product. So we have those kind of laid out before we do user testing and interviews. And after the interview, we'll look at our assumptions and be like, this one was validated, invalidated, this one needs some more research. So just getting your ducks in a row beforehand about, again, why you're doing the research is super, super helpful and really necessary. Whoop.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more.
Cool.
You think? I'll ask, there are two questions that are kind of the same. I'll ask, can you talk about the post-interview process, printed transcripts, stuff like that? And someone else asked, what do you feel like the best method is to record and preserve your insights? So,
cool. So post-interview, again, you have to ask who's your audience for this post-interview process. So for us, we have clients who were not with us in the interviews. So our job is to communicate to them. You know, we break everything down by maybe screen if we're showing a prototype, bullet points, things that we've learned per screen. And we break it, we synthesize into what our next steps are going to be, what things we haven't learned yet, things that were, again, validated, invalidated, and things that we want to continue to do research for. So those kinds of things, we just put together a quick slide deck, like really minimal, just to kind of present those things. We also have audio files. Again, we just use the voice memos app in iPhone and just record all the audio. So we just put everything in Drive. And we also have in Drive our scripts. We have, when we have someone facilitating and someone taking notes, the person who's taking notes, they're taking notes in the Google Doc, and they're also putting that in Drive. So at the end of the day, we have so much information. And yeah, just to kind of hit on that, there's a recording software that we used recently that I'm blanking on the name of, but I'm sure you can find it. But it's just something where it records what the user is looking at and like their flow through the app and also their reactions to it. And right now, this is the perfect time, blanking on the name. But again, those kinds of projects exist. It's very rare when you kind of like go back through video or audio, but there's like, it's helpful for that one random moment where you're like, what was that thing that person said? So that's kind of why we do it. And again, just depends on who you're showing this, who this is for. If it's for an internal design team, I'm sure y'all have your own expectations around how you share data. But for the most part, you kind of want your key takeaways. And again, like always forward thinking. Again, design's never finished, right? So you always want to think about what's our next step, what we're going to learn from next, like what kinds of holes we have that we want to, get some more insight on. So yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, we have a couple more questions, but I think we're pretty close to time, so it's up to you.
Whatever you think.
I think there's one that was pretty good. Do you want to do one more?
Yeah, sure.
Someone asked, how do you self-evaluate after each interview in order to improve for the next interview? What's a good measure of a successful user interview?
So I'm assuming you mean for your own interviewing skills?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Okay. Let's see. Well, you know that you always have your internal gut feeling if something goes kind of well or not. I know afterwards, sometimes during the interview, I'm kind of taking notes of like weirdness or things that like questions that I asked that weren't necessarily like, there are times I'm going through the script and a question was really confusing. Actually, I didn't word it correctly and it actually created more confusion than not. So I would kind of go through the script again and kind of just edit some things. It's helpful for you if you don't hate the sound of your own voice. It's helpful for you to kind of listen back to some of your recordings as well. That's probably the best way if you really want to improve your own facilitation skills. Listening to yourself is probably the best way to do that. And also too, not being alone, but having a partner and setting the stage with your partner and being like, I really want to improve in what I'm doing. So as you're taking notes, can you also think about me and like take a note or two on like how, if there's anything that kind of sticks with you that I should know about, let me know. So we're not in a vacuum. You can try and leverage your team as well, which I've done. And also it's very, very helpful. Hope that helps.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think we're good on questions.
Awesome. I want to tell y'all that I am on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect, you know, I'm trying to get there. This is really exciting stuff. There's a couple of other slides that we're not going to go through, but y'all are going to.
And we'll include the slides at the end.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, if you want to connect, I'm happy to chat more. I love talking about this stuff. So feel free to send me a message and we'll connect.
Perfect. And everybody will send out a recording of this and the slides, I think tomorrow. So
cool.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great day.